Yeah, I think Beyonce is definitely drop kicking the door open, and I think that people don't really understand like how bad it was at the CMAs in 2016.
This is the Country Music Awards.
Yeah.
She performed with the Chicks, right?
The Chicks, yeah. She performed Daddy Lessons from her album Lemonades. And I have friends who were there and who, like, vividly recall people shouting racial epithets at Beyonce from the audience and booing. And, I think in her Instagram post, she called it, like, a negative experience that she had.
Yeah.
But I think that's an understatement. The question is, like, if Beyonce is experiencing that at the Country Music Awards, what are other Black artists in country music experiencing?
How are you?
I'm good. I'm so happy to be talking to you.
You doing all right?
I'm doing good.
Welcome back. Yeah, welcome back home.
Thank you. It's good to be back. I, like, breathe a sigh of relief every time I land back here.
Yeah, you're in New York now, right?
Yeah.
But you missed
stressful.
Is it stressful?
It is.
It's
People
hectic.
move fast. Yeah.
Yeah, go back to Winnipeg.
Yeah. Now that's a pace of life I'd like to get into.
So I want to talk a little bit about the record, and I want to talk a little bit about you for people who don't know you as well. I didn't know this, but we were doing research for this interview, and I found an interview where you talked about how it's a very banjo-y record you made, this new one.
Super banjo-y.
And I had found an interview from, I think, a few years back where you talked about how you'd become a little tired of using the banjo as a main instrument. Where did that come from? What did those feelings feel like? And how did you find your way back to it?
Fatigue with playing the banjo fatigue. It's a clinical ailment.
It's in the...
I think it was just born from feeling like it was limiting to me. Like, I just felt that people saw me and they were like, oh, bluegrass, oh, old time, oh, folk. And there just wasn't much that I could do that felt modern or felt different or felt kind of progressive. And I had kind of resigned myself that, like, okay, well, if I want to make music that feels innovative and different, I'm gonna have to put this instrument aside, and I'm gonna have to, like, go to the Moog store and buy a synth, and that's how I'm gonna have to, like, showcase my songwriting, and really, like, I started working with Joe Grass, who's the co-producer on this album, and at the beginning I said there's not gonna be any banjo on this record. And he was like, great, yeah, well, just send me songs. Like, as long as there are songs, we can do something with them. And eventually I just totally had a change of heart. And I just felt like, no, there's a way to make this work. And especially going through, like, film composing and seeing that there are ways that you can manipulate your instrument to make it fit you. And that the banjo could theoretically, like, be a sequencer because you're just playing patterns repetitively, and so, like, trying to think about it put it in a different frame than I had before.
Was the problem you or other people? Like, was the problem that you picked this thing up and you were like, I can't think of anything. Like, this instrument is so fly around my pretty little maid to me that I can't move past it. I can't make new things in it. Or is it that, like, hey, I know I can make new things with this, but just I know when people look at me with a banjo in my hand, they have some sort of idea of what the music I'm going to make is?
Honestly, I don't know. It's very chicken or the egg. I think I probably at the time I would say I felt bereft. Like, I felt bereft of creativity. And so it was like, I just felt that in order to become creative, I had to set this whole thing aside. And also, yeah, of course, other people, it became difficult because I was a banjo player who was a songwriter, and it started to get confusing because I felt that people would look at me and they would be like, they wouldn't see the skill that I have with the banjo.
What would they see?
They would see a songwriter who casually plays banjo, and I just didn't know how to communicate that, like, I started as a banjo player before I became a singer and a songwriter. And I don't know, playing banjo brought out songs, and it just was I think a complicated relationship that I had with this instrument, where I wanted to be excellent at songwriting and excellent at banjo. And if I couldn't write a song that had both featured, then it just felt frustrating to me.
So what happened? What's going on now? I mean, this record is so psychedelic and forward thinking and modern. And I know these are not typically terms I use for records that don't have banjos on them, but I'm sort of following myself onto that trap right now. But it is very modern sounding. A lot of banjo on it. So you just kind of picked it up and found it again? Did the sequencer thing, I think, really helped?
It really helped. At the time, in 2021 and 2022, I went through a film composing program, and it just totally changed my own view of my own musicianship and my view of how I could access my creativity. Like in this program, for example, they were like, great, write a film cue for a small chamber orchestra. And I didn't know how to do that. I was like, I'm just a folk singer. I'm just a band, Like, I think I had kind of diminished myself and put myself in this box that I was angry about, yet I, wouldn't really leave. And so I think getting pushed in these directions where I was really uncomfortable made me feel like, oh, well, playing the banjo is actually something that I can innovate on very easily because I know my way around this thing.
Because you're a great player on it. You know how to do it. You put the Malcolm Gladwellian hours into it.
Not as many as he would say.
You don't think he got 10,000 on that thing?
I don't know.
You've been playing since you were how old?
11.
Yeah, I think you got it, Kaia. I think if you spent 10 minutes on it a day, you'd have it, for God's sake. When people ask you about why you picked up the banjo, the story I hear is a familiar one, which was like, hey, I grew up around folk music. There was a lot of folk music in my house, and I was brought to a lot of folk festivals, and I was brought to a lot of folk conferences, and that's where you and I first met. And so the banjo was around, and I loved it. But here's my question about that, because I'm wondering about myself too, right?
Yeah.
There were a lot of other instruments around then too. There were fiddles, there were auto harps, there were mandolins, there were upright basses. Any idea what it was? Because I don't know. I know that I picked it up when I was 15, and I can't quite figure out what I want, why I loved it more. I heard Oh Brother, and I was like, I just want that. I want to buy that thing. And it was only on 2 tracks in the whole record, but I want that thing.
Yeah.
Did you ever get there with figuring out? Because you were 11?
11. And it was Mitch Podolak, who was the founder of the Winnipeg Folk Festival, who basically told me that I was gonna, he was like, I'm gonna give you a banjo lesson right now. And you're right, I could have just had that banjo lesson 20-minute thing and been like, okay, great, whatever, and not picked it up. But I think that part of it was I was looking for a community. I think that was really it. And I wasn't finding it in classical music. I was playing the cello and the piano, and I was musical, but I felt kind of lonely. And I think the thing that the banjo was a gateway to was the old time community, which is, dysfunctional and problematic, like, most other communities.
Yeah.
But it felt like there were people there who I could relate to and who welcomed me. And, Mitch also, he encouraged my mom to have a garage sale to fund the flights for me to go to banjo camp in North Carolina. And so really early on, he was like, I'm going to teach you this, but I'm also going to make sure that you meet other people who play this music, other young people. And I think if I hadn't gone to the States and done that throughout my teenagehood, I wouldn't have the same relationship.
Were you being told at any of these camps or in any of these worlds about the Black origins of the instrument?
Oh, hell no. No.
Because I figured maybe not in Canada, but maybe when you went to the States or something. No?
No. The first time I had an inkling that the banjo was, originally an instrument from West Africa was when I saw the Carolina Chocolate Drops play at Folk Alliance, which is a conference that we've both been to in Memphis, Tennessee.
And Carolina Chocolate Drops, for people who don't know, is Rhiannon Giddens' old band. I think they're not together anymore. I think we can say old band.
Yeah, old band.
Sure, yeah. Can you tell me about that moment? Your eyes are getting wide, so I figure it's something.
Yeah.
Either you can't remember or it was meaningful.
No, I absolutely remember. I was a teenager. I'd been playing a bit, a fair bit up to that point. Again, attending these camps with zero idea of the banjo being a Black instrument. And I remember being in the lobby, the atrium of this giant hotel, and just hearing people start talking. And they're like, there's this incredible band that's playing, in Century Ballroom C. And they're like, there was just like a buzz about them. And so I went in to see what the buzz was about. And all of a sudden, like, I opened the doors. It's like manna from heaven. It's like 3 Black people on stage playing string band music, and then only after they finished playing, like, whatever it was, cornbread and butter beans or something, did they then start to talk about the Black history of the banjo. And they talked about it like it was a known thing.
As we all know,
blah, 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 our mentor, Joe Thompson, who's a Black fiddle player from the Piedmont region of North Carolina, and I was just like trying to process this as they were talking. And I felt like I was like trying to catch up to what they seemed to know as fact.
it must have been meaningful. It must have been like meaningful to you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there are all these little junctures, right, in your life that point you one way or another.
Yeah.
And as much as I loved the old time community, if I hadn't seen the Drops play, if they hadn't come onto the scene, I don't know if I would have really kept going in that direction.
Because you felt like you felt like you didn't have.
Yeah, like I felt a bit like the raisin in the oatmeal, like even though there was this community that I loved, it was like, well, but why am I as a mixed race person playing this music that to me like has, like connotations of like deliverance and like the white South and Confederacy.
Yeah. And so you see Rhiannon in the band, and Dom and Justin, right? Justin
Robinson,
great, all great players.
So good.
And you were like, okay, well, this is my music too. This is my music.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
How about songwriting? Because most of our friends, a lot of our friends, continue on playing traditional music. And, they go on and they play cornbread and butter beans, and they play, what was the other song I mentioned? Fly Around My Pretty Little Maid. I think I said that. Yeah. And, they play traditional music. God knows I did. When did songwriting enter your life?
I think in a way I had always, this is very cheesy, but I had always been like writing songs. Even when I was taking piano lessons, I was less interested in like the Suzuki whatever lessons and more interested in like, how can I create something cool? How can I like drone on this chord and see if I can like write a couple things? And I had never really considered it a deliberate act, really. And I think learning old time music and studying old time music, I wanted to be part of the creation side of lyric writing. And I had like learned about Ola Belle Reed, who was a banjo player and became a songwriter. She wrote High on a Mountain, which is like played by so many bluegrass artists. And I'd considered that to be a trad tune. And it was like, no, she wrote that. I was like, oh, you can write? Okay, well, then I'll write.
Yeah, like every now and then there's just like someone gets one through.
Yeah.
And it's so good that we call it traditional.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I want to do that.
I want to be one of those.
Yeah.
What was the first one? What was the first one outside of the Suzuki where you were sitting there maybe with the banjo in your hand and you weren't playing Sail Away Ladies?
Yeah.
I'm just knocking off banjo tunes here, by the way. It was you weren't playing Sail Away Ladies. You were like, do you remember the first one?
Yeah, I wrote a song called Maggie May. And again, like just, this is my world, right? Old time music is my world. So I'm like pulling from these tropes and these like lyric themes. And I was like, I want to write a song about like a couple who are like angry at each other, but he wants her back. And, and I was like a preteen. So this was all like, it's all so much drama. And you're like, yeah. And so I wrote this song and I played it. I played it for a couple of people. I remember I played it for my mom and like a couple of my friends. And I feel like people's reactions were enough that I was like, okay, maybe I could keep going with this skill.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just like, oh, yeah, good job, yeah, whatever. Like, it was like, oh, yeah, wow, that's an interesting thing that you did. And
how did it go? Do you remember?
I was really nervous, but...
Like, how did the song go?
Oh, how did the song go? Okay. Maggie May, won't you open up that door? Something I don't love you anymore.
Oh, my God.
Da, 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 da.
How old were you?
Oh, 13.
Come on, it's really
13,
good for
14.
13.
Yeah. I was a little baby.
I remember seeing you when you were like 15 and you were playing original music. Maybe it was some of those old songs. I remember I told you this 1,000 times, but I remember all of us being in the room being like, come on. The kid who's been running around the hallways and backstage at folk festivals can write like that. It was wild. Let's listen to something.
I was a storm in a teacup, thickening the water steeped in my anger, and you claim to be the one to understand. Don't you understand? You're not a friend to me, just a stranger grinning like some sick entertainer.
I thought we could listen to a couple of songs and just talk a little bit about where they came from. That's The Witch. I love that first line. I was a storm in a teacup, thickening the water, steeped in my anger. What's going on? What's that song about?
Rage,
Okay.
Tom, rage. Yeah, I obviously love history, and I think was reading about Tituba, who was, I believe that was her name, but she was a indigenous woman who was one of the first, during the Salem witch trials, was one of the first people to be accused as being a witch, and she was burned at the stake and all these horrifying things. And at the same time, I was, as we all do, going to therapy because I was nearing 30, and
It's a rite of passage.
yeah.
Right,
like you go to therapy and you bizarrely get really into like candles and I don't know.
I know.
These things start mattering to you.
Yeah, I grew a beard.
Yeah. There you go. And thinking about the ways in which I have sort of like put my anger in a box for fear of how it might make other people feel. And just like being raised as a woman is like, be accommodating, be friendly, and all these things. And so I was like, well, what if I can, bridge these two things together and take the idea of the witch, which is like the scorned woman, the woman with the scarlet letter, and just try to like fuse it with my experience, and sing it from the first person.
Let's listen to another track.
Strip steel fault lines fill your chest, and you call yourself the living dead, but a daisy blooms through your concrete stairs in Montreal.
I hear what you mean about the banjo as a sequencer there. Can you turn that up a little bit, Kevin? Like, it's so how I'm used to hearing the instrument, but you're right. It is sort of looping, and its natural property is to loop.
Yeah.
Very cool. So the last record, Grenades, which I really loved, very based on your family history. I'm thinking personal. I can see you smiling at me. Personal, sort of a personal narrative on that one.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, I call in Montreal my depression disco.
Hello.
Yeah. It's just, I wrote it like, living in like the midwinter of 2021 was living in Montreal and just feeling like so isolated, and it was COVID time and lockdowns and all those things. And I remember like I felt like I came back to life when the snow started melting and I saw flowers, and I just felt so terrible inside and so depressed. But once I saw, things blooming outside, I was like, oh, there's a possibility for change within me too. Reminds me of that Ron Hines song, No Change in the Weather, No Change in Me.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I had those lyrics down, but I was like, Jesus, Kai, are you gonna write another like sad song? Like, you've got those down. Like, you can try something else. And so I started messing around with this like loop, this sequence on the banjo, and I thought, well, why don't I try these lyrics with this and just try to kind of like fuse them together? And In Montreal is what came out.
How do you feel when you perform it? Do you feel the joy or do you feel the sadness?
I feel both. But mostly joy, especially with drums. You can't really be that sad.
No, when you have drums playing in the background. That's what Steve Martin said about the banjo. It's actually, for banjo players, it's true for drums, right? Steve Martin said that about the banjo. It's hard to sing a sad song with a banjo in your hand. Proving Steve wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Since she was 11, everybody.
Yeah, maybe if you get above a certain BPM with the banjo, then it's like sad, 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 happy.
What's it been like the past month or so since the Beyonce record came out for you? Because the reason I bring that up is because it feels like that moment you had when you walked into Folk Alliance and you saw the Carolina Chocolate Drops and they went, of course, the banjo is an instrument of Black origin. It's a West African instrument. It's been developed through as Rhiannon puts it, cross-cultural exchange throughout its history. Mm-hmm. Rhiannon, also from the Carolina Chocolate Drops, playing banjo on the big hit single. Mm-hmm. What do I want to ask you about it? I mean, does it feel like that? Does it feel like the doors are being kicked open to Folk Alliance for everybody else?
Yes and no. I really like the Beyonce record, and I think, Rhiannon's banjo playing on Texas Hold'em is really great.
Real good.
Really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, her playing with it, like, especially with gourd banjos, like, I feel like, she's, like, such an underrated banjo player with, like, fretless gourd banjos.
For people who don't know, gourd banjos, Gourd. It's not a guy named
Gourd.
Yeah, Billy Strings and gourd banjos doing a tour together. Joe Grass, Billy Strings, and gourd banjos going together
on tour.
Only as much as you want to talk about this, by the way, but it is an interesting time.
Yeah, no, it's a super interesting time. Yeah, I think Beyonce is definitely drop kicking the door open, and I think that people don't really understand like how bad it was at the CMAs in 2016.
This is the Country Music Awards.
Yeah.
She performed with the Chicks, right?
The Chicks, yeah. She performed Daddy Lessons from her album Lemonades. And I have friends who were there and who like vividly recall people shouting racial epithets at Beyonce from the audience and booing. And, I think in her Instagram post, she called it like a negative experience that she had. Yeah. But I think that's an understatement. And so I think the question is like, if Beyonce is experiencing that at the Country Music Awards, what are other Black artists in country music experiencing? Yeah. And Linda Martell, who Beyonce mentions, and whose voice is on the album. Linda Martell was a top-selling country artist in the 1970s and had to leave Nashville partly because her record was shelved. She was a Black woman. Her record got shelved by the record company. And when she was on tour, every location she went to, basically, from her words, she would get shouted at and booed. And so, to have that happen to Beyonce 40 years later, it's like not much has changed.
Beyonce too, right?
Beyonce. Yeah. And so I think it's great and it's shedding light on all this stuff. That being said, if you look at the country music charts, Beyonce's at the top and not a whole lot of other Black artists are there. So I worry that they're going to begrudgingly let Beyonce through because she's Beyonce, but that there won't be systemic change within country music. It'll
be a moment that, hey, look, everybody, we did it. Beyonce's at the top of the charts. Now we can go back to normal.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's nice. It's interesting to see people have the conversation. It's interesting to see people write me and go like, I didn't know about, Mm-hmm. They had no idea about, the origins of this music or where this music came from.
Yeah. But now they do. I mean, awareness Awareness is good.
Yeah, but it's not everything.
It's not everything.
Change is good too.
Change is better.
Yeah, money's good too. People getting paid and having careers is good.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
It's good too.
Yeah.
I love the record so much, and I'm so happy to hear you playing so much banjo on it. We played in Montreal. What else did we play? We played The Witch. I like to give we always play something after the record, and usually we try to pick it. But for the past little while, we've been asking people, like, is there anything on the record that maybe needs a little love, or maybe it's not going to get played as much, but it means something? Your eyes are widening. Is meaningful to you that you would like to hear from the record?
Yeah.
Tell me.
Thanks for asking. I have a
No
song
problem.
called "Often as the Autumn," which I wrote. It's based off of a West Virginia ghost story. And the story, in its original telling, there are these men living in a cabin who hear a noise. They go outside. It's like the middle of the night. It's a rainy night. And they see this like 12-foot tall shadow monster. And of course, they bring their rifles because they think it's going to do something. And then they shoot at the shadow monster, and the shadow monster disappears. And weirdly, the story ends. It's very anticlimactic. When I was reading it, I was like flipping the page, like, well, where's the rest of the story? Like, does the shadow monster come back?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, wow, I'm just going to write this.
You felt a tap on your shoulder.
Hello.
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 And then me and the Shadow Monster wrote the song together.
Yeah, we jammed. Co-write.
They're getting 10% of the publisher. Anyway, so go on. So you read
First
that story.
name Shadow, last name Monster.
So you monster, comma, shadow. So you read the story and then what?
I was like, I'll just have to finish the story myself.
Oh.
I'm just gonna have to figure out how this ends.
How did you resolve it?
So I changed the protagonist to be these women living in the cabin, and I added a farm, and the shadow monster is slowly killing off their sheep, and they have one sheep left, and they eventually face off with the shadow monster, and they're like, please don't kill our last sheep. And the shadow monster is like, nature doesn't owe you anything. It's brutal. And the shadow monster kills the sheep, and they cry.
Why was that the resolution you came up with? It's interesting.
It just felt very heavy metal. Like, to not have things get better or resolve, like to have the resolution be like nature is all powerful or something. And
Yeah.
I don't know.
A little old time too.
It's very old time. Yeah, and I couldn't let this record go without like some like old time stuff. Like Rain and Snow, that doesn't end well.
No.
It ends terribly.
Banks of the Ohio, horribly.
Horrible ending.
They sometimes add a verse where he goes to jail, but most people don't.
No.
No. Bad, sad stories.
Yeah. Old time heavy metal. The stories don't have a happy conclusion.
I'm trying not to make a bad segue of like, well, I'm so happy I've had a happy conclusion talking to you. I love getting the chance to talk to you. You know that. And I'm so fond of you and your music, and I'm so happy with this record.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in, Kaia.
Thank you for having me, Tom.